This episode of the My Latin Life podcast is brought to you by Language Blend, the new best way to learn Spanish. Language Blend focuses on what you actually need to live and get by abroad with daily one-on-one lessons, a dedicated texting partner. It's like living in a Spanish-speaking country without ever leaving home. Go to languageblend.com for more information. Welcome back to another episode of the My Latin Life podcast. Since 2014, My Latin Life has been your trusted guide to traveling and living in Latin America. My guest today is Nicole from Nomad, Neeks. She can be found on Instagram and is also the host of her own podcast, the Work, Wealth, and Travel Podcast. Nicole, how's it going?
It's going amazing. How are you doing?
Doing well, thank you. Where are you calling in from today?
So, I am in beautiful, actually, today it's a little bit cloudy, so not so beautiful, but I am in Paraguay.
Excellent. Are you in Asuncion?
I am not actually. We spent a month in Asuncion and now we're in San Bernardino, which is about an hour away.
Mm-hmm.
Really beautiful, but it's June, so it's the winter here, so it's a little bit chilly, but really beautiful getaway on the lake to just relax.
That's awesome. Is that just like a weekend getaway thing, or are you really doing like a month in San Bernardino?
No, we rented a really beautiful villa here, for a month, so our month is coming to an end soon, but it's just crazy, finance is something and money is what I love to talk about, but we rented this place for just an insanely little, in my opinion, amount of money. It's a 3 bedroom, 3 bathroom, pool, outdoor barbecue, pool table, big beautiful kitchen, like, it's just a dream home. So we feel very blessed to be here for the month.
That's awesome. Can I ask how much you paid?
Yeah, we paid, I think it was around 450 or 500 US dollars for the month for like two people.
Okay, with the mansion on the lake, that's good.
Yeah, well, it's not on the lake, but it is a really beautiful, like 20-30 minute walk to the lake, or you can just rent a bike, as I think all nomads probably do, and then it's like a very short bike ride. So yeah, I couldn't ask for anything better. But it's funny in our nomad travels, we find my partner and I, we find if we're in anywhere for longer than a month, usually like 3 weeks even, we're like, okay, we need to move on to the next place. We get a little bit restless.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, so for the audience, a little bit of background. I ended up coming across your profile, basically, I think just through Instagram, through the Explore feature or something, and I saw that you were talking about Paraguay, and I had just never seen a North American female traveler in Paraguay before. I know a lot of the dudes in Paraguay, as the audience knows, but I hadn't seen just like a Canadian girl traveler in Paraguay, and so it really kind of piqued my interest and started kind of looking through your profile, and then saw that you had your own podcast as well. And here we are. So thank you for coming on the podcast. It's awesome.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so maybe you could give us a little bit of a background about how you started traveling, how you became a digital nomad, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, for sure. I'll try to keep it short because my story can get a bit long sometimes. But so I'm from Canada, and growing up, I think like many people in any Western culture, we're really kind of always sold like a quote unquote dream of what it's going to look like to grow up. So, I did all of the things that you're supposed to do. I went to university and I got my degree, and then I got the corporate job. And growing up, I was always like, I want to get the corporate job. I want to, have the beautiful office and wear the pantsuit into work. And for me, I wanted to be in the big city, which in Canada was Toronto. I'm from a pretty small town.
Hmm.
So for me, Toronto, like 4 million, was the big city. And so I kind of, in a way, got that dream. It wasn't in the big city, but it was still a corporate office job. Very flexible, might I add, but it was still what I wanted. And then I realized less than a year into that position that that was not what I wanted, because I could see essentially the rest of my life. I was 21 years old at the time, and I could see what the entire rest of my life looked like. I knew that I would stay in Canada, move up the corporate ladder, maybe move to Toronto, which is like 2 hours away, big deal. Um, have the mortgage, get married, have the 2.5 kids, the dog, the car. Like I knew exactly how my life was going to look, maybe minus a few holidays or vacations here and there. And for me, that was so scary. But, to preface, what I always say is I know a lot of people and I still have friends and family who are in Canada who are living that life and who want that life. And so if you want that life and that's what you are happiest doing, I say amazing. Like I am so happy for you if you have chosen that life and not just kind of gone through the motions and not completely chosen
Mhm.
that life. But if you want that life, amazing. I just want everybody to have the life that they want. And so I realized I was not living the life that I wanted. So what could I do to change that? Because I knew that nobody was going to make any changes or decisions for me. I had to do that myself. So I started looking into what I could do to leave Canada. And at 21 years old, I was like, you know what? I'm going to go teach English. I wanted to go to Korea. That didn't work out. Well, my recruiter kind of talked me into moving to Shenzhen, China. And I was like, China? I don't want to go to China. Like, who wants to go to China? And this is in 2017. So I was kind of like, okay, let's give it a try. I was like, the worst thing that can really happen is I don't like it, come back to Canada, regroup, and do something else. So in 2017, I moved to China, Shenzhen, China. At the time, my plan was to really just travel every year, go to a different country, do something different, do some volunteering, and just see what I liked. But I ended up absolutely loving China. It was a city of 12 million. Loved the big city, loved all the people. I met a great group of people there and ended up staying there for 4 years. But in the end of 2019, we started hearing whispers from the north of, because I was in the south, we started kind of hearing in the north that there was a virus happening and a few people had died. But then a month later, it was Chinese New Year in January. So a lot of people, Chinese and expats, leave the country to travel. So I was outside of the country, as were many others, when COVID got really bad in China. And this was the first country that COVID got bad in. So we had no idea, like, I had no idea how bad it was actually going to get. I just remember seeing photos on WeChat of there being no food in the grocery stores and everyone freaking out and, a lot of strict laws because it's a communist country. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm so terrified. I need to go back to Canada because it was just such a process to even get back into the country, into China. So I went to Canada expecting to be there for a few months until I could get back into China. China closed its borders to all residents in March. And I was like, holy shit, I literally don't know what to do with my life because my entire life was in China. I had a job, I had a partner, I had a cat, I had a great apartment. Like I was planning to move up the corporate ladder in China as well in my position. So I really didn't know what to do. I was stuck in my parents' house in Canada and my life was halfway across the world and I had one, carry-on suitcase with me. So, but now looking back, I'm very grateful for that time because that was, and I think for many of us, that was really the first time that I had in a long time to not have any distractions and to just take a look at my life and to ask myself again, is this really what I want in my life? Is what I'm doing and what I am working to achieve in the future what I really want? And the answer again was no, because I was basically just going through the motions, same as I was doing in Canada. This time I was just doing it in China. And so I realized, like this is not how I want my life to look. I now call it my lifestyle design. This is not what I want my lifestyle design to look like. This is not my dream life. So I ended up, taking that time when I was stuck in Canada before I got back into China to figure out what I enjoyed, what I was passionate about. I ended up building something for myself online. So that is my digital marketing agency, which I also run. And then thankfully in October of 2020, there was a very short window to go back to China. I went back to China, but this time knowing that I wasn't going to be there for too long, knowing that there was another chapter in my life that I was ready to move on to and leave China behind because I had been there for quite a while. However, life never goes as planned, which I love, but never goes as planned. So I got back to China, and about a month later, I connected with someone who is now my partner. But at the time, I had met him 4 years ago when I first arrived to China. And of course, at that time, nothing happened. But as soon as I get back into China and I'm planning to leave China, we kind of re met and started hanging out and dating. And I was like, look, I'm leaving China. And he had 4 restaurants in China at the time. And he was like, I can't leave China. And I was like, that's too bad because I am. So he ended up leaving China. The plan was for 1 year. We moved to Istanbul, Turkey, and that was supposed to be for 1 year. And then a series of events happened in China. And we were just like, you know what? We don't need to go back to China. Let's just travel. So we had an apartment in Istanbul. We ended up breaking that contract after only about 3 months and traveling Turkey, traveling a lot of Eastern Europe, the Balkans area. And that was kind of the start of our fully nomadic digital nomad journey. And it's been about 2 years, give or take. I don't know exactly,
Mhm.
but of us kind of being wherever we want and discovering new countries. And we both live out of a suitcase, which I absolutely love. I'm such a minimalist, so I couldn't imagine having anything more than my suitcase at this point. And yeah, that's kind of the short version of the story.
Yeah, that's awesome, and thank you for sharing that. And so, how did you start earning money after you left China and you're in Turkey and all these places? So, how are you earning online?
That's a good question. So, like I mentioned, during 2020, when I was stuck in Canada, I did start something of my own in a space that I was passionate about online, but that kind of evolved eventually into what is now my digital marketing agency. It wasn't that to begin with, but as I kind of started along in my online business journey, I realized what I was passionate about, what I wanted to do, the type of people I wanted to work with. And so now for about the last almost 2 years, I have been running my digital marketing agency online, but it really started with a lot of trial and error. It started during COVID. I went back to China and I still had a job there for a few months when I went back. So it was a lot at that time. It was a lot of saying no to hanging out with friends and seeing other people, of course, after kind of the initial when I got back to China. But it was really me being really focused and thinking I wanted to build something for myself, and so I was gonna have to put in the time, the energy, and the work to do it. And yeah, it's evolved into what is now my digital marketing agency, and I love doing. But it definitely was not that at the very beginning.
Cool. So, you had the digital marketing agency. Was it a process of, I guess, learning entrepreneurship and trying to make that work?
Oh, yeah. Oh, it definitely was, yeah. I mean, it always still is. I love still learning, but at the beginning, it was a total mindset shift. I had no idea what I was doing in the online space. I had never before thought about I can have something of my own and just have my laptop, and that's all I need to be connected to everyone and everything. So that was kind of the first obstacle, but it was definitely it's an interesting mindset shift going from being an employee and how you
Mhm.
think working for somebody else, whereas now when I look at somebody who works for somebody else, I think, there's so many thoughts that pop into my head. I think of my old teaching job and I'm just like, where is this? Where is all the money going? And who's not the headmaster or headmistress, but who actually owns this? Is a company is I'm there, it's very much so more like business minded, but it's
Mhm.
been 3 years, I wanna say. Um, I guess, like, 3.5 years now since I kind of have been on this journey, so
Mhm.
definitely was not an overnight shift, but it's a big mindset shift that now when I think I was just talking about this on the podcast with someone the other day. Now when I think of working for somebody else, being an employee, I'm just like, "I don't know how I could ever do that," but I did it for so long because I think that's kind of just what we're told that we have to do and what we're supposed to do, but when you find that there's more to that story and that's not the only option, yeah, it can really change things.
Hey guys, if you are interested in Paraguay residency for yourself, we can introduce you. Simply send us an email to mylatinlife@gmail.com and we'll introduce you to the best practitioners in the industry who can help you get your residency in Paraguay, tax ID, cedula, driver's license, all that good stuff. All you need to do is send us an email to mylatinlife@gmail.com or alternatively send us a DM on Twitter and we will send an introduction on your behalf to the best practitioners in Paraguay that can help execute your Paraguay residency. Again, mylatinlife@gmail.com. Simply send us an email expressing an interest in Paraguay, and we'll make it happen for you. Yeah, that's amazing. Um, should we fast forward and get into some red meat about Paraguay?
Sure.
Was that kind of your first? How did the Latin America stuff happen? If you were over in Europe, and then I guess you met your boyfriend who's Mexican, and then I imagine you started in Mexico, and then how'd you kind of make your way down?
Yeah, good question. So we were, yeah, like I said, in the Balkans, and then he hadn't really seen his family in about 8 years. He like left China for a
Jeez.
week or two, but it wasn't really anything like long term to see his family. So we were like, you know what, we have the time, and I actually needed to go back to Canada. I'm sure any digital nomad understands this. I was like, I have like credit cards that I need to pick up in Canada, so I was like, you know what,
Right.
let's go back to Mexico, and then we can fly to Canada. Um, so we stayed in Mexico for like 3 or 4 months. We stayed in a few different places with his family for a little bit, traveled around, and then from there, we went to Colombia, which I had no expectations of Colombia, but I just knew it was such a digital nomad hub, and I was so excited to check it out. And I'm sure you've been. I don't know what your opinion was, but it like was not one of my favorite places, I will say.
Interesting.
There were I did like Medellin was great, but I would definitely say out of my favorite countries that would not make the list. But everybody looks for something different, and then
Where
yeah,
did you
we
go? You
flew.
must have been to Cartagena. Is that why? Or tell us why you didn't like Colombia, because obviously our audience, I'd say pretty much everyone in our audience has been to Colombia and spend a fair amount of time there.
Yeah.
What did you not like about it, or do you want to break that down?
Yeah, so we started in Bogota. I'm sure most people probably do, and then we did Medellin and Cartagena, like about a month, give or take a little more, a little less in some places, in each destination. And well, for me, Colombia was really shocking. The poverty, I'll say, first of all. Like I've never been to any other country, and I've been to most of the countries in Asia at this point. Um, I've been to I think like 45 countries or something like that, and I've never seen poverty like just very blatantly, openly on the streets in that level. And Bogota was definitely the worst for me. And it's so funny because even when we were there, we were meeting other nomads and people who live there, expats, and they were all even the local Colombians actually, because my partner loves to socialize and he speaks Spanish, so he would be talking to everyone, and basically everyone we met was just like, yeah, Bogota sucks. Like it's not where you want to be. So I don't know. It was just kind of like the overall vibe when we were there. It was kind of very cloudy. We were there in it would have been
Hmm.
like February.
Yeah, I think
And
that's every month.
yeah, that's what I've heard too. And I don't know, it just like the vibe was not amazing. And I was expecting to go to Colombia, especially Bogota, and it just be like party, reggaeton. And I was like, okay, cool. Like I want this. And maybe it was the expectation that was in my head, but it really didn't meet that. Medellin was a little bit better. Medellin, like Provenza area, definitely a more fun vibe, but I don't know, like there's party streets everywhere. For me, it wasn't anything like crazy or amazing. It is great, I will say, the amount of nomads that are there. Like we love connecting with other people who are doing the same thing we're doing so that they understand the struggles, the day to day. I can't really connect much with somebody who works an office job, nor do I want to. So it was like a nice
Hmm.
community that we were able to find there, but I didn't really see anything super amazing or different from Medellin from any other cities that I really liked. And yeah, Cartagena was great. I don't really love the beach and I don't love humidity. So for me, it was just kind of like, yeah, it's the beach. The downtown was beautiful and amazing, like the old town.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know, we'll definitely go back to Colombia at some point and check out some of the other places, but it wasn't, it definitely would not make my like top 10.
Hmm.
But that's just my opinion. We all have our own opinions. Also the food, like the arepas, I was like, I don't know. I just can't. With like a lot of, like I'm not a huge lover of the like corn tortillas or anything made out of corn. So I don't know. For me, like the food wasn't amazing. But I
Yeah,
don't know, we all have different
Latin America
opinions.
is a bit of a struggle if you don't like corn.
Yeah. And I'm also a vegetarian, so, like, that also comes into play as well. But I think I'm, like, so used to that by now. It's been, like, a decade, so that's, like, nothing new for me. Um, But yeah, so then we left Colombia and then now we are in Paraguay and we kind of skipped like all of the countries around because I am getting my like residence process here. So I was like, you know what, I need to do this soon, as you know, before my police check expires. I had 6 months. So I was like, you know what, let's just get it over with. We'll fly down there. And then we're going to explore this kind of part of the southern part of South America while we're here. And,
Hmm.
yeah, I don't know, just see what happens whenever we get bored of a country or a city or a place, we're just like, "Okay, let's go somewhere new."
Very cool. So you said that you got residency in Paraguay. I think a lot of our listeners are familiar with the idea that one can get residency in Paraguay. So let's dive into that because it's an exciting topic for a lot of people. Um, I guess how did you learn about this? What have been the benefits for you? Why did you decide to do it? Do you want to kind of walk us through that?
Sure, yeah, if I miss any of those questions, just let me know. I learned about it because I've always been very interested in, well, like I said, finance and personal finance. I talk about a lot from a digital nomad perspective, but um, I don't know. I had known about the world of tax optimization for many, many years. Even really before starting my business online, I knew that it was a thing that I could do, and I was excited to do once my business had grown and was big enough to really warrant that. So I was looking at a few other options. Dubai was definitely in the cards for me, but ultimately I chose Paraguay. I mean, my partner is in Mexico, so or he's from Mexico, so we'll probably be close-ish, you know, in this part of the world, on and off every few years. So I was like, okay, that's a plus. Probably won't be anywhere near Dubai or don't really want to live there. So I don't know, and it was it's very nice because I didn't want to have to live somewhere, and, like, you know, really get the official residence, so kind of more of a paper residence here, which is what I wanted because I didn't want to have to, like, settle somewhere for 3 or 6 months as most residency programs are, so this was kind of a nice option for me. One other thing that I like, there's kind of, like, twofold for this, but is the corruption can go one way or the other sometimes, but sometimes, you know, it can benefit you, and where I'm from in Canada, there's a lot less of it. So kind of being able to, you know, speed up the application process if you need to or anything like that. So yeah, I don't know. There were a few different factors that went into the decision, but it really just came down to me being like, you know what, I need to choose somewhere soon. And so that place was Paraguay.
Very cool. And so I guess the idea is that this year, 2013, you'll file your final Canadian tax return as like
Hmm.
the what's it called, like the leaving return, and then you'll be no longer a Canadian resident. You'll have to give up your OHIP and your and your
Well, so I haven't been a resident for a few years at least. I don't know exactly when it was, because I haven't been a resident. I haven't lived there for so long.
mhm.
So I haven't been a resident for a long time, but then, you know, you still do have to pay taxes if you make money and it goes into the country and like all that fun stuff. But yeah, this year of 2023 will be my last official tax filing in Canada. But yeah, I haven't been a resident for quite a while, which brings up like another tax problems and issues that probably would be good to talk to your accountant about. But yeah, that's just kind of how it worked for me.
Mhm. Yeah, maybe I wonder if we want to dig more into that now or maybe come back to it. Let's dig into it a little bit more now because I mean, it sounds like you're interested in all the, uh, personal finance stuff for digital nomads. I know you talk about personal finance on your podcast a fair bit as well too.
Hmm.
So the podcast again is work, wealth, and travel. What are some of the common themes in terms of personal finance that you get into on the podcast? What are some of the big like epiphanies or aha moments that you've had and that you help share with others?
That's a good question. One thing I get a lot is investing as a nomad, which, you know, really can depend where you're from and there's a lot of different factors. But I just found I got so many questions and budgeting as well as a nomad, and so many questions about like, how do you make this lifestyle work? How do you, either get a remote job, and how do you figure out what you can afford and what you can't afford? And so for me, I was getting so many questions, and I still do, which is amazing. And I turn a lot of those into podcast episodes. Um, but I was just getting so many questions that I was like, you know what, this is a topic that I love. And in terms of the finance, kind of tax optimization flows into that sometimes as well. And so yeah, I just kind of started speaking about it more, and I love the feedback that I get from it. But I think what you asked was probably budgeting would be one of them, and budgeting looks different for everyone. It's kind of just like a blanket term, I would say. But for me, I have a system that works best for me. Doesn't mean that it's gonna work best for everyone, but just figuring out what works best for you and the type of person that you are and how organized or not organized you are, and just figuring out how a budgeting system looks best. I, of course, like, have an accountant, but I keep track of every single thing that goes in and out of my personal, of my business. Like, I just want to know at the end of the month and just have it there at a glance, or even halfway through the month, like where I'm at, what's come
Mhm.
in, what's gone out. So really just figuring out what works for you. That's what I like to do. But then, yeah, also investing is something. I just had an episode come out a few weeks ago. I have a co-host. On Fridays, we have a digital nomad digest segment. And she's also nomadic. So we just kind of talk about digital nomad things. And so she's not very well versed in the space of finance, for digital nomads. So she had a bunch of questions that she basically just like rapid fire asked me. So definitely check out that episode. I can link it below if you want that link as well. But yeah, so just kind of talking about the investing, the finance, the budgeting, and how can you make a digital nomad lifestyle work for you? Because I really do believe, I know I mentioned this off air, but I really do believe that a digital nomad lifestyle, if you truly want it, like, yes, you do have to, in most cases, work unless you have a really amazing remote job where you can just kind of take off. But you do have to work to get a digital nomad lifestyle and to live this lifestyle. And I think so many
Mhm.
people dream of it, but you really have to know your numbers and know your finances, and have enough money coming in, and kind of know all of those fine details, and be very comfortable with, logging in and checking your credit card statement and your bank account balances and where everything's at and what's going to be coming out of the accounts and going in. And
Mhm.
I don't know. I really love it. I think it's so interesting. But if you want to be nomadic, I really do believe that that is one of the important first steps to be a sustainable nomad, not just to maybe do it for a month or two and then have to come home, or even do it for a year and then have to come home.
Makes sense. And so your co-host is Cami?
Yes.
How do you know her? What's Cami's like 5-second story?
Yeah, so she's Brazilian. She's really cool.
Ooh.
I actually just like
Sorry.
what?
You piqued my interest. Anyway, keep going.
She's really cool. She's a French boyfriend. She's taken. But she I actually just posted in a Facebook group because I love listening to podcasts where there's kind of like a back and forth banter. And so I was like, you know what, this would be like a cool vibe for my podcast. So I just posted in a Facebook group. I chatted to like a bunch of nomad girls, and a lot of them stood out. But her, I was just like, it's a very interesting vibe because she talks about like alignment and spirituality, and that is not me at all. Like, if you ask me about any of that, like, I would love to learn about it, of course, but that's not my realm of genius, and it totally is hers. And my realm
Yep.
of genius is more like the practical, the type A, the finance, the like how to do things concrete. So we kind of make a good team and have very unique perspectives, which I really like. But yeah, she's also nomadic. She lives in Greece right now, and yeah, we just kind of like shoot the shit.
Cool. And so you said you guys met on, I guess, like a Facebook group or a forum. Are these digital nomad groups specifically for like female digital nomads?
Yeah, so there is like a huge, probably any female listener is probably already in it. There's a big, I think it's just called Digital Nomad Girls. And then there's of course another one run by, I always forget his name. He's a friend of mine. But it's like a yellow background. I think it's Digital Nomads Around the World is kind of like the overall one, but there is a specific one for females, which is so amazing. If I have any digital nomad question, like I go to that group because everyone is just so helpful. But sorry, you can't be a member.
If you're not a girl.
Yupper.
Okay, is that female digital nomads or digital nomad girls community?
I think it's digital nomad girls. I can check really quickly if you want, but I am pretty sure it's just digital nomad girls.
No, very cool. What do you think are some of
Yeah.
the issues that are specific to female digital nomads?
Ooh, well, I it really depends, I think, if you travel solo or not. Like, that's a huge factor. I don't know how many
Right.
women and especially solo female digital nomad travelers you've had on the show, but I have
Like a
never
solid
been
like
a
five plus, five, seven. Yeah,
okay, you gotta
just for
get some more in there, I
context.
think. You have a lot of episodes, you gotta get some more women on there.
Yeah,
Um
we've had some couples. I well that we're trying. We got you. You can introduce us to more people offline. But yeah, keep
Yeah,
going.
for sure. You can't join the group though. That would be my, resource for you. But, yeah, so I do really think it depends, solo female travel is like, oh my gosh, a whole can of worms, and I have, like I said, I have never, really done solo female travel, so I cannot speak to it. It's not something I really ever talk about because I'm not an expert in that topic. I know many girls are on Instagram or in different forums and communities, but, safety is, of course, a huge one. I think that, like, men
Hmm.
is a lot less thought about for men. I see even just between my partner and I, like, he can be
Hmm.
so chill and cavalier about things, and I'm the complete opposite just because I have to think about safety so much more, but I think in these countries, in South America, I haven't I guess I think, as a woman, I think about safety and any other woman will all the time. So it's not really any different in this part of the world versus when I was in Eastern Europe, when I was in Asia. I was gonna say when I was in China, but actually that's like a whole different story. You can walk around like 4 a.m., be totally wasted. It's totally safe because everything is
Hmm.
monitored. It's a communist country. There's cameras everywhere. So that was actually the one country I felt pretty safe in, which is kind of crazy to say, like much more safe than Canada even. But yeah, I don't know. I think from a safety perspective, it's something that's always on my mind. So it isn't really any different in this part of the world. However, it was interesting because my partner is Mexican, so he of course can read all the news, and since he was young, he's kind of known what's been happening with the narcos and
Yeah,
the
he has a
cartels
different
there.
relationship with safety.
Yeah, so, like, hearing some of the things, like, he's had, like, really good childhood friends that he grew up with who have been kidnapped and murdered, and it's just so crazy because as a tourist, you don't really see that side of things, and sometimes you can't even, like, read the headlines, so you don't really see what's happening, like, on the ground even if you're there, if that makes sense, so, like, being able to hear that and see that from him and his family, yeah, it's really
Mhm.
interesting, but
And if I
again,
may ask, sorry to interrupt.
mhm.
If I may ask, what state is he from in Mexico?
Yeah, well, he's actually from, like, the worst one now. I know Sinaloa, I think it was the worst one, with drugs, but now Michoacan is kind of the worst one, and that's where he's from,
Okay,
Morelia, so it's about
Morelia.
a, like, 4 or 5-hour drive from Mexico City, so it's nice because I love Mexico City and it's not too far, but,
Mhm.
yeah, it's kind of, like, the worst one right now in terms of the narcos.
Cool. Yeah, I've been to Morelia. I like it.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty chill, there's not too much happening, I would say, but the downtown's beautiful, it's really chill.
Mhm, mhm. Sorry, where were we? And then, so we'll get back on track to finances. I actually do want to come back to maybe your experience in Mexico and then Latin America in general from like a social perspective and how it might compare to Canada and so forth. Because I did want to ask how maybe you got on with the family and everything.
Mm, mhm.
So maybe we'll come back to that. But I wanted to just keep the thread going with
Yeah.
finances a little bit, just to make sure we kind of exhausted that. Um, what are some of the things that you've done to sort of optimize your um, your personal finances as a digital nomad?
Mhm. Well, I think the first one I already kind of mentioned was my again, I really hate this word, but, like, the budgeting, it's a spreadsheet, It's not, like, major budgeting, it's not something I think about every day, I don't think finances should be all-consuming, But that was definitely not something I did when I was an employee. Was, I knew how much money I was making. I knew when it would hit my bank account every month, and I didn't need to keep track of what I was spending. But now I've gotten myself in the habit for probably about like a year and a half now of every evening or every morning, whatever, at least once a day, inputting everything I've spent into one currency, like converting it all, um, and putting it all in there. So for me, that was a big mindset shift that I had to have of like, this is something that I need to do and I want to do if I want to be nomadic. So I think for me, that was a big one. But then for me personally, another big one to really optimize my finances was my residency. I think we all do it for the taxes and for the money that can be saved coming from whatever Western country that
Hmm.
we're from. So that was a big shift as well because I think in Canada, like, it's a great setup in the case of healthcare where, like, we don't have to pay. We have universal healthcare and everything is great. Well, actually, it's not great. Everything is great in terms of money with that, but the wait time is just crazy. When I went to China, I remember getting an MRI, and it was 100 Canadian dollars, and I waited about 8 days to get it done. And I was just in shock, like, what a low fee for basically next day service. I would consider it because in Canada, you'd be waiting 6 months to a year, maybe longer depending on the wait
It's
time.
insane.
Just it's crazy. So, like, yes, it's free, but for me, I would rather live in these countries where healthcare is a lot cheaper. China, like $100 for an MRI, crazy. Where healthcare is cheaper, but you are paying for it, whether it's out of pocket or insurance, like whatever that looks like, but it's so much faster. Sometimes it's same day, next day, a week later. So for me, that trade-off is definitely something that I would prefer. But yeah, like I said, my residency and really optimizing my personal residency and then also my business so that I can save money on taxes because Canadian taxes are freaking expensive, especially if you are considered a non-resident, they'll tax you more probably.
Hey guys, quick break from the episode to tell you about BitRefill. BitRefill allows you to shop online and in person without banks, converting your crypto directly into merchant balance. We're talking gift cards to Nike, Amazon, Apple, Airbnb, Hotels.com, and many more, all paid for with crypto. BitRefill offers more than 10,000 gift card options in 180 countries, including the USA, Canada, all across Latin America, including Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, Argentina, El Salvador, and many more. You can also apply the code MyLatinLife at checkout to get 10% back on your first purchase. Go to bitrefill.com for more information. Yeah. Yeah, I think what's interesting about this is when you're an employee in the Canadian system, you kind of don't mind paying the taxes because it's just,
Yeah.
you're just kind of part of the system. But once you're an entrepreneur
Yeah.
and you're making all your money just basically through your own mind and through the internet, and it really has nothing to do with the country anymore, you start thinking to yourself, like, am I really getting the value out of the
Yeah.
30 to 50% taxes that I'm paying? And you start saying, like, why, like, and you kind of start having a different relationship with government and a different relationship in terms of it's like a different negotiating position where you're now in sort of the driver's seat and you say, hey, look, like, you guys need to compete for my business, you need to compete for my tax dollars, and maybe
Mhm.
I can go somewhere else, be it Dubai or Paraguay, where it's just more favorable for an entrepreneur that's earning money online.
Totally. Yeah, I like that you touch on that because you're so right. The mindset you have as an employee, especially in a country where there is universal healthcare, it's just, you're happy to pay the taxes because the roads are good and nice and you get the healthcare and the tax bill is going to be a lot, but you're kind of getting something from it. But yeah, you're totally right. It once you are no longer in that system, and I really have no desire to ever live in Canada again. Of course, never say never. You never know what'll happen. But as of the way my life is going right now, I really don't have a desire to live in any Western country, but especially Canada after living there for so long. And yeah, I really wanted, I knew if I wasn't going to live there for at least the next decade, if not much, much longer, why be in that system? Why be paying into that system? I am a dual citizen, so I do have another passport. I would like a third passport. If you get me on the topic of like governments and oh gosh, that's like a rabbit hole I could go down for days. I'm sure you've had people on here talking about that and just my distrust. I love decentralization, kind of like that whole rabbit hole. But yeah, kind of a stepping stone for me was figuring out which country can benefit me and then opting into that system.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So why would you not want to potentially live in Canada when you're old and gray, or at least after, your, or maybe when you want to have kids in your, late 20s, early 30s? Have you sort of learned from your time abroad that maybe Canada's not the place for you, or just that other places are better, or just it's definitely a bold statement. It's one I kind of agree with. I may or may not also be a Canadian dual citizen. I'm kind of semi anonymous, but I may or may not know where you're coming from. But yeah, would love to hear it from you.
Yeah. And that's why I say like you can never predict the future. So, of course, we all have plans, but you never really know what's going to happen in life. So, that's why I say, as of the way that my life is going now and the way that I'm planning my future, I have no plans of going back to Canada. But it is nice because I can be there for 6 months and then be a resident again. Whereas, in America, if you want to get rid of that, then you got to get rid of your passport. So that's a little bit different. But like I have planned my life around to a degree. I don't like to plan everything out, and that's kind of why I love the digital nomad lifestyle. But in the long term, I do have a loose plan of what my life will look like with my partner. And Canada is not in that picture. It's really be in whatever country is best suited to my needs at that time. I also kind of get a little bit restless when I'm in one country. My partner and I we were always like, we would love to build a house in the Philippines. He loves the Philippines. Asia for us is really just home. We both spent so much time in China. I did a lot of growing up in China in my 20s. So China is kind of more home for me in a lot of ways than Canada. Like I'm so looking forward to probably next year when we get back to China and visit some friends there and whatnot. But yeah, kind of the plans that we have. And maybe when I'm like 65, maybe I'll be in a beautiful sunny country, or maybe I'll want to go back to Canada for a bit, but I'm not gonna not get rid of my residency because of something that may or may not happen in the future, if that makes sense. And, we have thought about, I don't know if I really want kids, but if that's something that would be in the picture, like we would love to adopt from a country and we would love to world school. I had a really
Mm,
amazing guest speaker all about world schooling on the podcast, and that's not out yet, but it will be shortly. And I knew a little bit about world schooling, but I just learned so much from her. She's had a TED Talk, her and her son, who grew up all around the world with her, about world schooling, and it really just solidified for me, like, that is the education system, if I were to have a kid, that I would want them to be a part of, not the education system that I was a part of and probably you were too, and my partner was, and most digital nomads that I talked to were, where I personally think there's so many better ways to be educated and to learn knowledge, that's also a little bit less biased by the government and their say in what they want you to learn as well.
hmm I definitely want to ask you a little bit about world schooling. Do you have any more last thoughts about, like, maybe just kind of why Canada isn't the place for you, or why you're sure about that? Because a lot of our audience is really in the same place. Our audience is Canadians, Americans, a little bit of Europeans, and we're almost doing like the reverse migration where we're coming from these,
Yeah.
cold first world countries to go live in tropical, developing, opportunity filled Latin America, and would love to just hear, and so people can identify with it. So, any more thoughts about just like maybe why not Canada, that type of thing, and why you're so sure?
Yeah, well, I think, it really does depend on everyone's own journey. I personally never truly felt aligned in Canada. I had a great, childhood and growing up, and there was never anything wrong with Canada. But I think when I thought about what my what I like to call lifestyle design, like what my ideal life, if I could design any life, what that would look like. It did not include being in cold Canada and hanging out with the same 10 friends who I've known forever and going to the same bar and coming back to the same apartment every night, and then, having kids there and just kind of like being miserable. Like that was not what was included in my lifestyle design. So for me, I just kind of knew I had to leave Canada if I wanted to make something different for myself. But again, moving to China 6 years ago now was kind of the stepping stone. And I would encourage anybody to leave because also, so as an example, I did a study abroad when I was in university. I was in Slovenia, lived there for 4 or 5 months, came back and was like, "I never wanna travel again. I do not like traveling. I missed my friends, I missed my roommates, I missed my family, I missed the routine." But I was a lot younger then, so I would encourage you to really just go anywhere. Try it, don't do the holiday or the vacation for 1 or 2 weeks, but actually live a digital nomad lifestyle for a short period of time or maybe a long period of time, and maybe it'll be for you and maybe it won't, and either way, it's okay, like, you can figure it out, but, the first time I went abroad for an extended period of time, I hated it. And then I was in Canada for another, I don't know, 4 years maybe, and realized this is not the life that I want for myself because like I said, I saw my future and I saw all of the milestones that were quote unquote supposed to hit in Western culture, the climbing the corporate ladder and the mortgage and the car payment and the 2.5 kids and getting married. And like none of that interests me. I never dreamt of the wedding or the white dress. I never dreamt of having kids. I never actually even wanted a mortgage. I was always mortgages just, it never made sense to me. I was always like, why wouldn't you just rent, or if you're gonna have a mortgage, then somebody else live there, like, that just never made sense to me either. So I think a lot of the things that were kind of associated with Western culture just never made sense to me, and I actually questioned them. I think they probably don't make sense to a lot of people, but a lot of people don't question them. And
Mhm.
so you just kind of go through the motions of life, and I, at 21 years old, realized that's not how I wanna live my life. But if it's how you wanna live yours, then that's amazing. Like I said, as long as you are actually just choosing it and not going through the motions.
Yeah, no, I like that. Um, you alluded to earlier about how you don't identify super well with like office workers and stuff, and I obviously as a nomad, that's not really so much the type of people that you're going to be meeting on the road. But I was curious, like when you go back to Ontario to visit? Do you see your friends? And you probably must have some sort of like epiphanies just seeing them, and they're kind of maybe like doing the same thing. It's not like dynamic enough, or has that been kind of an interesting experience, like going back and visiting Canada after all these adventures?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I will say, one thing I've realized in this journey is I would much rather have less friends and less trauma, honestly, and just have really quality friends. So I wouldn't say I have a million friends back home when I go to visit Canada, but I do keep in touch with a few good friends who we made really great lifelong connections.
Hmm.
And yeah, I do see them kind of going through the motions of life. But I also see that some of them are happy, and I think some of them maybe could like go for and like live a different lifestyle and be okay with that. But like maybe their partner doesn't want that or for whatever reason. But yeah, I can see both sides of it when I go home, and it's so funny. I'm sure you experience the same. There's some people who are like, yeah, I love my job. Like I'm moving up the corporate ladder and having a kid or getting the house or whatever it may be, and they love it. And then there's some other people who are like, "Oh, I would love to sell all of my things, and I would love to like travel the world like you, but no, 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 I couldn't do that for like X, Y, and Z reasons, whatever that reason is for them." And I always just kind of, like talk about my story and lifestyle design, but ultimately it's really up to them. And I think a lot of people probably won't take the action and won't make the move. And I'm very grateful that I did that at a pretty young age. Because it is a lot more difficult the older you get as you move up the corporate ladder, as you start making, the quote unquote amazing corporate money, it's a lot harder to leave that, or you have the mortgage payment, whatever. You can, of course, always leave that. There's always an option. There's never anything that you could really do that you can't undo or leave. But we get so caught up in everything that you're like, no, I just couldn't leave that. So, yeah, I definitely do see both sides of it.
Hey everybody, hey everybody. Quick break from the podcast to tell you about Language Blend, the best new way to learn Spanish. Language Blend was co-founded by Jake Nomada, friend of the podcast, decade of experience in Latin America, and Jake and his team, they put everything into this program that they wish they had in terms of how to level up quickly with your Spanish language skills. Because the faster that you can get conversationally fluent in Spanish, the better the experience that you're going to have in Latin America. So go to languageblend.com for more information. That's cool. That's a good balanced approach. So that was good. Kind of, yeah. Well, tell me a little bit about your experiences just in terms of maybe cultural shocks in Latin America. I'm sure going to Mexico was a culture shock in more ways than one. Do you want to maybe walk through some interesting experiences there?
Yeah, so there is one that will forever stand out to me. Um, so like I said, my partner is from Mexico, so this was at the very beginning. Well, first, we arrived and his mom, who doesn't speak any English, and I don't speak much Spanish. Thankfully his brothers and his dad speak a bit of English, but his mom speaks no English. So we arrived and to the house, he hasn't officially really been home for an extended period of time in 8 years. We get to the house and his whole family is there. They've cooked, the pozole, the soup, and they have a mariachi band in their living room playing the music and drinking the tequila. And I was just like, it does not get more Mexican than this. Like, I loved it, but it was just so funny because my family is so low key. Like, to walk in and have a mariachi band playing in your living room all night, like it's just not a thing. So I loved that. First of all, is like my kind of introduction to arriving in Mexico with my partner. But one thing I will never forget that was such a culture shock for me was probably like the first weekend. We were in Mexico and his whole family's there, and the first like Friday night his whole family's there and we're all talking and catching up, or they're all talking and catching up, and I'm kind of like listening in. And then Saturday at night, they all come again and they all have the barbecue and they make the enchiladas and they're drinking tequila all night, and it was nice. And then the next night, they're all over again, and this was like Sunday night. They're all over again. And then as one of his aunts goes to leave for the evening, she goes in like broken English. She's like, "Goodbye, I'll see you tomorrow." And like not even in a rude way, just in a completely shocked way. I was like, tomorrow again? Like, this is the fourth evening in a row that the same people are gonna be here. And like, I didn't mean for it to sound rude. I don't know if that's how it came off, but I was just so shocked of like I see my grandma maybe 5 or 10 times per year. Like, if I was living in Canada, that would be, like, pretty normal. And I've just seen his whole family for 3 nights and now potentially a 4th the next night in a row, and I was just such a culture shock of, like, family is such a big thing there, which I think we all know, but to actually experience that level of family closeness firsthand, I was just like, "Okay, this is next level." I mean, maybe some families in Western culture do that if they're very, very close, but I would say my family is like a pretty normal standard family, and like we don't see each other that often. So it was, yeah, it was kind of interesting, and that's something that'll always stand out to me because I was just so shocked that we would be seeing everyone again for the fourth night in a row.
That's actually super funny. And I love how that stood out to you instead of like maybe being normal or something.
Oh, that's not normal for me now.
No, and I agree as well. That in the U.S. or Canada, that is kind of a tip. I think that's super interesting how you mentioned that you don't in Canada you don't live with your grandparents; they live somewhere else. Even is that in the
Yeah.
same town or
Yeah, pretty close by,
pretty
but
close?
yeah, not together.
Like less than 20-minute drive,
20 to 30, yeah.
20-30 minute drive, and you see them 5 to 10 times a year, and that's totally normal in
Yeah.
Canada or the US, which is insane. Whereas at very least in Latin America, at very least it would be like every Sunday.
Oh, yeah. Every Sunday, yeah, at least. Sunday's like the family day, but then it might be Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and yeah, it was a lot of family time, so I really had to get used to that and, like, also tell my partner, like, "Okay, we need to, like, us time," because, yes, we were staying in his family's house, but, like, the extended family was just always there, especially at the beginning.
And what did he say regarding us time? Was he like, "What? Did he not get it?"
No, he understood. He left Mexico when he was 18 and he lived in China for 8 years, so he definitely understood it. But he also understood his family's side of things too and why they would wanna see him and what the culture is like, but he understood my side of things too, and yeah, so very grateful for that. Like I said, we both spent a lot of time in China, so our home cultures, our first cultures, I don't know what the right word would be, is, like, not the only one that we're kind of used to taking into consideration.
Right, because you have this like shared third culture.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you like fully fluent in Chinese, by the way?
I am not. I can get by, like, I could order stuff and buy stuff, but I was studying actually for about 2 years with a tutor, but then COVID happened and I was like, "Well, I guess I'm never going back to China because that wasn't the plan," so I kind of stopped, but my partner he went to university there, so, we have, like, 3 languages between us, which I actually think I mean, I only have 1, but I actually think are, like, the best 3 languages to speak in the world right now.
Which is what?
English, Spanish, Mandarin.
Okay, and you try to keep advancing on all of them?
Well, me not so much. I've never really taken any type of like formal Spanish, but it's surprising to me because I am not a natural language learner, picker upper. Like my partner is very much so. I mean, we were in Serbia for a month last summer and he was speaking the language, like not fluently, but like he was saying things by the time we left after a month. And I was just like, how? But I don't know, my brain just doesn't work that way and I've never really like forced it to, quite honestly. But I'm surprised at the amount of Spanish I've picked up and I can understand while being here. But it's funny because I think that Spanish is such a difficult language, especially, and everyone always gets surprised by this. And of course, there are certain pieces yes and certain pieces no. But I think Mandarin is so much easier for me because
Hmm.
there's almost no conjugating.
Right.
Um,
It's like
and
all
so
present tense.
yeah, yeah, exactly, like, you don't say, basically to say, the past, you don't have to conjugate, you just say yesterday or whatever that past word is. Of course, there's a little bit of, like, conjugating and, different things like that, but I think that Spanish is just yeah, I'm sure I would think English is difficult if I didn't speak it, to be honest, but anything where you have to start conjugating and then they have, like, te amo, it's 2 words, but it really is, like, kind of 3 in 1, and they have these words, I don't know the official, term, but, like, these words that kind of it's 1 word to mean, like, 2 or 3 different things because of the beginning and the end are changed because of the person, and it's yeah, it's so I've picked it up enough to kind of understand what's happening, but to speak it, it's a different story.
Yeah. Was there any special words they told you, Mexican words they told you had to learn?
Um I don't think any, like, special Mexican words. I think we all know tequila, so that was a pretty important one, and mezcal, but, I think yeah, no, aside from that I mean, I'm also, like, very lucky, I feel, because my partner speaks Spanish, so I never really felt like I was too pressured to have to speak Spanish, because he can get by on a lot of things, but, yeah, we help each other out with, like, language questions and whatnot.
Hmm. Cool, cool. If I could teleport into the future down to Paraguay, I mean, what's your experience in Paraguay been like? Could you give us just some observations about the country? Do you like it? Not like it? What sticks out to you?
Yeah. I mean, of course, there's so many elements that go into a country. I think the people here are very nice, very kind. I've been in some countries where, like, the people I haven't really gotten a super great vibe off of them, but everyone that we've met here, even if they don't speak English, are very kind and very helpful. So I do appreciate that. Asuncion, the capital, is it's a pretty small city, I will say, which of course we knew going into it. and arriving here, but I love a big city. That's why I moved to Shenzhen, China. But yeah, it's very peaceful and relaxing, I will say. Even when you are in the capital, there's not too many people, which is kind of nice, especially if we were to come here right from China, it would be like a complete like 180 swap because China there's so many people. Here you can walk around in the capital and I find there's not that many people. So it is kind of nice, very just like chill, relaxed vibes. So we always kind of say, it's great that I have my residency here because if we ever just want to go somewhere and relax and be in a part of the world where it's kind of away from all the craziness and the news and just all the crazy things that's happening, like this is a really good kind of like getaway. Is it somewhere I want to live for the rest of my life? Probably not because it's not, like, a big enough place for me personally, but, yeah, I mean, of course, the capital has really everything that you need, so that's nice, but, yeah, it's just very relaxing. The food is another thing. The food I haven't really tried too much because the only local food I can find is the sopa or like the chipa, which is basically just
Mhm.
different types of bread. So I try not to eat like too much bread. So I find like sometimes trying the local things, and then if it doesn't include meat, it can be a bit difficult. But like I said, I'm pretty used to that. But I find it's a lot of bread here.
Mhm. You like chipa?
It's okay. Like I said, it's once in a while. It's okay to try,
It
but
sounds like you give it like a 4 out of 10.
yeah, it's bread, so doesn't get me too excited.
Oh, I like it. It's like a gooey, cheesy bread. It's good.
It
Anyway,
is good, yeah, but I don't know, I like to try a few
you're in
different.
like carnivore central down there. Has it
Oh,
been
yeah.
but you still get good fruit, I guess. Has that
Yeah,
been
oh, yeah, like, I there's always options, and, you go to any supermarket and it has fish. I eat fish, so, like, it has the fish and it has the veggies and the fruits and, like, I love a smoothie, so it has, like, kind of the basic things that I like to eat. I like to keep it pretty simple, honestly, but, yeah, like, there are some foods and different things to
Mhm.
try here, but I don't know, some of the local things, I don't wanna eat too much of it.
Did was there like a mismatch in terms of expectations versus reality in Paraguay? Did you expect some super backwater place and maybe it was a little bit more advanced than you thought?
I that's a good question. You should have asked me that, like, right after I arrived. Um, I think like, what I had in mind was fairly spot on, obviously not completely, but I did expect, like, a pretty small city, which it is, Asuncion, and, we actually made the mistake. We always book our Airbnbs in the downtown because 'cause we're like, "'Kay, downtown, that's where it's all happening." It's not here. It's just a lot of homeless people, which is, like, fine, but it's not very safe to go out at night, so we kind of booked it in the wrong place. So there's kind of the Via Mora area and a few other areas that are similar to that
Mhm.
are very, safe to walk at night, a little bit more trendy, nice malls, things happening. So we'll definitely stay in that area now that we know next time. And I think kind of that more like modern area was maybe something that I wasn't expecting so much for Paraguay to have. But just like any country, it has that. And it has different areas that are good or bad or trendy or maybe not so great to go at night. But yeah, I think for the most part, like it kind of met my expectations. The one thing that we were surprised about is, of course, because it's right on the river, which is like the border to Argentina.
Mhm.
I didn't expect it to be so green, especially driving into the city, like into the downtown part. There's so many trees and so much greenery, and the river was beautiful, and there was like people kayaking on the river and biking, and I was like, this is nice, like I like this vibe, so I wasn't expecting that.
That's good. That's awesome. And compared to Mexico, did you get like maybe a better vibe or a different vibe in Paraguay? Like if you had to compare the two, Mexico versus Paraguay, like what are the maybe pros and cons of each?
Well, Mexico for me, like, I love a city. So for me, I think most of the places that we visited in Mexico, not even just Mexico City, were bigger and had, kind of more stuff going on here than here in Paraguay. Um, but really it's so interesting. The thing that stands out to me the most is that there are just not a lot of people here. Like you can walk down the street and some days see nobody. It's crazy. Like, I mean, in the downtown area, because that's where we were. Um, but yeah, like it really just I think the thing that stands out to me the most is that there's not that many people here. Another thing that we've noticed,
Even
just
though
as a
there's like 3 million plus people in the metro area.
yeah, which really isn't like a lot, I think, for a city. I think it's I don't want to say a number. I heard it was not that many, but then I think like a lot of people come in for their jobs and whatnot. So in the daytime, it kind of becomes
Yeah,
more
it's
people.
pretty spread out. But yeah, continue. Sorry, to interrupt you.
Um, I don't remember where I was going, so it's okay.
Sorry,
But
Mexico versus Paraguay, big city.
yeah, I was gonna say something, but it's okay. But yeah, I think like for me, that is really the one thing that stood out was even in Colombia has a lot of people on the street and lots of performers and lots of things happening.
Mm.
But here I found not so much. Oh, the one thing I was gonna say is the holidays. Oh my gosh, like I don't know what's been happening like the last 3 months, maybe like April, May, June, but I think every other weekend has been some sort of holiday festival. They've been off work. I think 2 days ago was Monday, and they were off work for a holiday then, and it's been, like I don't know what kinda holidays they have here, but it's been a lot that we have heard of so far, so I don't know if you experienced the same.
Yeah, it depends on the country, but Latin America definitely has a fair amount of holidays. And your boyfriend has been doing a good job of sort of navigating things. Has he said any comments in terms of the way he's treated for his kind of Mexican accent and stuff?
Treated no, I think because he does obviously have a very different accent than like here in Argentina. And I can even just hear it when they speak. I think sometimes they treat him as a foreigner, not as a local, even though he speaks Spanish. And even some words he doesn't know what they're saying just because their accent, which is kind of funny. But I think sometimes they will try to rip him off, just like they would try to rip off any Canadian or American and just kind of like get a little bit more money out of you and see how much more they can get out of you. So sometimes I think even with him speaking Spanish just in a different accent, they know he's not from here. So they'll still try to get as much money as they can out of him. And then I just don't say anything because I know it's going to be like 3 times the price as soon as I say something. But yeah, I think that is one thing that we have kind of noticed. But I think that's in a lot of places in the world that aren't like Western countries. They're going to try to get the most money out of you as they can.
Sure, sure. And San Bernardino, it's cool. Are you liking it? How would you summarize San Bernardino?
Yeah, it's really beautiful. Right now it is winter. It's like June. So it is winter. It is a little bit chillier, but I know the summer. I don't know if you were here in the summer. I have not been, but I've heard it is so hot and humid and I see there's air cons everywhere. So I know what that means because that's how it was in China. So I know how hot it must get here. But I think in the summertime, so I think like December, January, February here, it's the place to be. It's kind of like a little cottage town. I compare it to Muskoka in Canada, if anybody
Hmm.
is, like, from that area.
Hmm.
It definitely doesn't it has a very small lake, but you can still go boating on the lake and do water sports, walk around the town. Right now, they have a McDonald's, a Burger King, a Domino's that are closed, and I was like, "I've never seen a McDonald's that's out of business," but it's not out of business, it's just a seasonal McDonald's. And so that was very interesting for me because there's literally no tourists. I think it's just locals here in the winter season, but in the summer season, it's happening. But the winter season, it's perfect weather. Today it's a little bit gloomy, but it's been like 20 degrees for the last 3 weeks. So I'm like, this is cottage weather for me. Like I know for them it's not. They're used to like 40 degrees, but for me to go for a swim in our pool or go to the lake or something, like 20 degrees is perfect.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. The San Bernardino, the Muskoka of Paraguay. It's actually
The
kind of
smaller
accurate.
Muskoka. Yeah. Have you
It's
been?
actually Muskoka.
No, San
Yeah,
Bernardino?
yeah. I've been to both Muskoka and San Bernardino.
Yeah, so you would know maybe it's definitely smaller, it's not on that scale, but it is very cottagey and cute and relaxing.
Yeah, and anyone listening who's not Canadian, I mean, Muskoka's kind of it's north of Toronto, like two hours north of Toronto. Tons of like big like mansion cottages we call them. They're kind of like chalet, like lakefront chalets. It's kind of like our equivalent of the Hamptons or Cape Cod or
Yeah.
something. Um, so yeah, San Bernardino's cool. So Paraguay, you got the residency, you got that all done. Overall, was it a smooth process and everything? Pretty happy about how things went.
Yeah, very happy. I hired a lawyer to do it for me. I know you can do it yourself. I think it's 600 USD to do it yourself, so it's pretty affordable. But I kind of wanted someone to do it for me just because I was hoping that would speed the process along a little bit. But yeah, I think you can really do it either way.
Very cool. So does is that must be a very freeing feeling to know that you're now like potentially a 0% taxpayer.
Yeah. I mean, even here, like the tax is just a flat 10%, and I'm like, not that I'll have to pay that, but if it ever came to like having to pay that, like that's really nothing. So, either way, it's a win-win for me, but yeah, zero tax. I mean, I am all for that. Who wouldn't be? Especially, I don't want to pay tax to a country where I don't live there and I have no intention of living there in the future. So, for me, it really just made sense to opt out of that system.
Makes sense to me. I think what a lot of people ask is, what do you do about healthcare? So I
Mhm.
imagine as a personal finance conscious digital nomad, you probably, are pretty savvy about this. What have you done for kind of international healthcare coverage?
Yeah, well, I think I do what a lot of people do, which is you just buy healthcare insurance. I know there's a few big ones out there. There's Safety Wing. There's another one, Atlas something. I can't think of it off the top of my head. It's basically the same policy as Safety Wing. I've like kind of looked in and compared the policies. I always call them and ask all the questions. I'm like that person before purchasing. But there are so many, and I think people don't realize this. There are so many different options for insurance out there, whether it be travel insurance or healthcare or like device insurance while traveling, so many options. I have like a freebie and I think now I'm up to like 20. I'm always updating it when I find new ones, but I think I have like 20 different um healthcare providers that work for digital nomads depending on like where you're from and what you're looking for. There's so many options out there and I think people just get so scared because we're so used to our country, not in all cases, but in most cases our country providing us healthcare, but if you're young and not even young but like fairly healthy and you have something that can protect you, then I would say like you're pretty good to go unless of course you have something that's chronic or something like that. I have a few friends who being a digital nomad is a little bit more difficult for them because of their healthcare issues. Um, but yeah, you can really buy any type of healthcare, and I think healthcare insurance. But I think it's also important to note, like I previously mentioned, that healthcare is so much more affordable, which I had no idea until I moved to China in other parts of the world that is not likely a Western country, or like don't even get me started on the US, even though I know Canada is basically the same price if you're not a resident and you just pay out of pocket. It's very expensive.
Hmm.
So yeah, like there are many other options that you have out there. You don't have to just rely on the government, and healthcare is much more affordable in other countries around the world. Just remember my China MRI, 100 Canadian dollars, like 80 US dollar example for a week later service.
Hey guys, quick interruption to tell you about Bitrefill. Bitrefill is the best way to convert your crypto into gift card balances. These are gift cards that you can spend at hotels.com, Airbnb, Nike, and many more. You may remember Joel Valenzuela, previous podcast guest. He's been living on crypto exclusively since 2015, and he's a big consumer of Bitrefill. And so I asked Joel, I said, what do you like most about Bitrefill? He said that he likes the instant delivery, the precise amount so that you don't have to juggle a lot of gift cards. And he loves the global selection. Nobody else has this much selection of gift cards, over 10,000 gift card options across hundreds of countries. Go to bitrefill.com to sign up. And you can also use the code MyLatinLife for 10% back off your first purchase. Go to bitrefill.com for more information. Yeah, that makes sense. And when you said you had a list of 20 providers, you obviously are that's just like a list you've accumulated being a kind of digital nomad that gives recommendations and stuff. But I imagine you just have like, one or two services.
Yeah. Yes, I don't use all 20 of them. But I use a safety wing, which I'm sure you're probably very familiar with.
Hmm.
And I know a lot of nomads use that one. But yeah, there are many other options, and I like to include those in my spreadsheet. But yeah, I definitely don't use all of those 20. That would be a little bit excessive. But yeah, everyone has options regardless of where you're from.
Cool. Good, good, good. And if I may ask, this is a optional question, as I suppose they all are. But what do you do for your company? Like, where is it registered?
Yeah, so I'm sure you probably know that's kind of part of the puzzle piece of figuring out your Paraguay residency. So obviously the residency is the first piece of it, but then you have to figure out where's your money going to come from, which is probably going to be your business. And then how is that going to be zero tax as well? So I'm sure so that's something that you probably had to deal with throughout the process as well.
It's something we talk about for sure.
Yeah, so for me, I think, like, probably for almost everybody, I would be curious to know if anybody has a different setup, that you have spoken to, but the disregarded entity LLC is kind of the way to go.
U.S. LLC, you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. And is that owned by like a holding company somewhere else, or is it just straight up U.S. disregarded and then Paraguay residency, or is there like a
Yeah,
third piece
no.
there?
No holding company, definitely not, but yeah, it's just a registered LLC, it's registered as a disregarded entity, so meaning that the income just kind of flows through to wherever I pay taxes, so that's why I couldn't really have that set up if I was a Canadian resident, but being a Paraguay resident, where if the money doesn't come into the country, then that's no problem, then zero tax. Or if it does come into the country, then 10% tax, which is also fine. But yeah, the money just kind of flows through. So not too many obligations for the LLC. I know for like S corps, C corps, you can do those if you are an American citizen. But there's a lot more kind of like filing obligations and different things like that. Whereas for the disregarded entity, it's a lot less filing, but you do have to file a few specific forms, and there can be a very big penalty if you do not. So,
Hmm.
as always
And
with
and so you have
bureaucracy.
the money flow into a U.S. bank account and stay there. So you just have it kind of like accumulating in a checking account or whatever in the States.
Well, I have a business bank account or a few
Business bank
business
account,
bank
yeah.
accounts. So like any business money will go into that, but then when I actually want to use that money, I have to take that money out and put it in another bank account somewhere. And it's very difficult to set up. I'm sure maybe you know this, a US personal bank account if you're not American or you don't have a social security number.
Hmm.
So I don't have any personal accounts, but that's fine because I think at this point I have like 5 or 6 different accounts around the world, and a few obviously I use more than a few other, accounts, but yeah, they kind of flow into those ones, and then unless it hits a Paraguay account, then it wouldn't be taxed, and then it would just be taxed the 10% if it does hit a Paraguay account, which is also totally fine with me, but, yeah, bank accounts is kind of another thing that I like to accumulate as much as possible because I don't like to have my money in one place. And I don't
Right.
like to trust one government with all of my money too, especially like the Canadian or American government or whatever that may look like. So I kind of like to diversify that as much as possible too.
Makes sense. So when you need to pay yourself a distribution, you don't want to do it to Paraguay, but you also don't really have that infrastructure in the States. So you send that like somewhere in Asia or something?
Well, I have a bank account. I have a few in Canada, obviously. I have one because I have a EU citizenship, so I have one there. Um, and then I have one in Georgia, two in Georgia, and then I have my one in China. So I can kind of like send it to wherever. And I mean, most of the things I'm paying for, I can just withdraw money either in that country or most of the things are going to be online. So for the most part, actually accessing my money is not too much of a problem. I don't do any, like, crazy spending on any crazy things.
That's cool. Did you go to Georgia and did you do a residency thing in Georgia as well?
No, because I didn't want to have to live there for that long.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Um, enough about that. Don't want to grill you too hard. I guess as we sort of start wrapping up, I know you use the term lifestyle design, and even when I look through kind of like the titles of your podcast episodes, I can see that lifestyle design is a recurring theme. What does that mean to you? And I guess what have been some of the design decisions that you've done that have made you most happy?
Yeah, so for me, lifestyle design, it's really just something that I like to say I coined. Someone told me recently that Tim Ferriss uses that in the 4-Hour Work Week, which I've never
Yep.
read, but I kind of know the general premises. And I was like, I had no idea that he used that. Like, I just kind of thought of that one day because it's what intuitively made sense. So I found that kind of funny. But for me, lifestyle design is really just creating a lifestyle that you actually want to live. So for me, there's kind of two pieces to it, which is first of all, figuring out, are you happy in what you're doing now in your current lifestyle? And if you are not, if the answer is no, then the next step is actually figuring out what action can you take to change that. It's one thing to just think about it, which is kind of the first step, and to ask yourself the questions and think critically about it. But the second step is actually having to take that action. And one without the other isn't really going to do anything. So for me, lifestyle design is really just creating your dream lifestyle and what that looks different for every single person. But really having those two components to it is critically thinking about it and then doing the action, taking that action. For me, that looks like moving to China. And I didn't know if I was going to love it or hate it or something in between, but I just knew if it didn't work out for whatever reason and it wasn't meant for me, then I could just go back and start from zero and try again. And so that kind of gave me the courage to take the first step. And thankfully, I loved China and I never looked back since then. But, that's not going to be the case for everybody. So, really just knowing that whatever move you make is not gonna be definitive, but just taking that big, scary action, which you kind of have to do a lot of the times if you wanna make a pretty radical change in your life.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Who have been some of your biggest inspirations? If you didn't know about the Tim Ferriss one, I was just curious. Overall, it does sound like you're pretty plugged into things, and you do have inspirations probably for personal finance, and then on the Nomad side as well. Do you just want to walk through maybe who've been some of the most impactful people to you, maybe that you know personally, or just through books and online presence and stuff?
Yeah, well, the one that always comes to mind for me, which is it's so crazy to say, but it's actually kind of the big reason that I moved to China, was it's a blog called Millennial Revolution. I think it's millennial-revolution.com. And I remember in like 2015, 2016, I was pretty young and I was reading this blog and they're a Canadian couple and both of their parents in their background is in China, I believe. I believe one she is. I think he's also from China, his parents. And they were living in Canada, born in Canada, and they had saved up $1 million from their engineering careers and they basically had a decision of, are we going to buy a house in Toronto using this $1 million, which, at the time, houses were probably about that, maybe a little bit less at the time. Now it's a lot crazier. Um, but that was their decision was, are we going to use this money to get a mortgage and buy a house, or are we going to do something different with it? And they had a really great investment advisor who told them, you can basically invest all of this money and live off of your dividends. And for me, and that's a very condensed version, it's their story, not mine. But check it out if you want to read their about page. And that was so inspiring for me because I think a lot of people talk about that now. But back then, this was like 8 years ago, nobody was talking about geo arbitrage, is a big one that I love talking about that I first heard from them. And dividend investing and living off of your dividends. Obviously, you have to have a lot of money in order to make a good dividend return. But I was just like, holy shit, a whole new world has opened up for me. I was like 19 years old and maybe 20 years old. And I was thinking, like, I can do this. I'm young. I want to have a different lifestyle. I saw them as really the first people to model that lifestyle. And this was way before kind of 2020 made being a digital nomad popular. Um, and yeah, they were kind of my inspiration, honestly, to move to China. I wanted to live in a place and geo arbitrage, essentially, which is live in a place where I would make good money and make what I would make in Canada because in a teaching job in China, I was. But the cost of living was so much lower than living in Canada. So I wanted to geo arbitrage. I wanted to dividend invest. I wanted to buy different ETFs and stocks. And this is also what I'd like to talk about in terms of finance as well. Um, and yeah, that was my plan, and that was what a big reason why I moved to China and why I left Canada, and then I just continued to discover and learn more, and obviously have never been back since, but they were a huge inspiration for me. They still have blog posts come out like every week and I always read them. They like to, as I say, like math shit up.
Hmm.
They do a lot of like numbers, but yeah, different calculations like for different readers, scenarios. It's really interesting to read. I would highly recommend checking them out as like a good resource, but they were kind of my first resource and the first person that I saw in the traveling slash finance space slash like
Hmm.
fire FI community as well,
Yep.
who were doing something that I didn't know I wanted to do, but it turns out I really fucking wanted to do it. So yeah, moved to China and then just never really looked back. In terms of being a digital nomad, I don't think there's too many people that I really looked up to. It was just kind of a lifestyle that I just knew I wanted something different. I was, like I said, doing the same thing I was in China as I was in Canada. I was just working for somebody else, working in an office. And I realized during the pandemic that you could live a different way. And I'm pretty motivated when it comes to something that I really want. So kind of just self started that. But I would really say millennial revolution is, it was a big one for me. That's a great question.
Yeah, very cool. Reminds me of like Mr. Money Mustache, if you know that
Yeah.
one as
Yeah.
well. And
Very similar.
yeah, and then there's another one, Go Curry Cracker.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I really liked his blogs. I read those for a while too.
Very cool. Yeah, so there's some nuggets for people. Random question. I just kind of a burning thought. So non-Canadian tax resident, um, where are you doing your investing in terms of are you maintaining a Canadian I forget what they call it, like TFSA and 401k and stuff, or are you having to do that offshore now because like, you know, because you're not a Canadian tax resident? How do you do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I can basically keep what I have in Canada, but I can't really buy anymore. I mean, I could, but then I would just like continue to get taxed on it. So it doesn't make sense. There are some um, brokerage agencies that you can go through that do work as a Paraguay resident. I think a lot of them will basically like the same rules apply for Paraguay as for the US. So I remember calling them and asking them, and I was like, as a resident of Paraguay, and they were like, "Yep, that's fine." Like basically, the American policies would apply to you as a resident of Paraguay. So there are a few. The main one is I'm blanking on the name right now. Um, Interactive Brokers, that's the
Mhm.
one. So that's like a good resource to check out for investing as a non-resident of your country, but it does depend where you're a resident of. So if you're a resident of somewhere that's not Paraguay, that might look a little bit different. But there are some brokerage agencies out there where you can invest and you can basically do everything you would do in your home country through whatever brokerage agency, and you can do it through them.
Yeah. So it's almost like obviously you're using your Paraguay address probably, but it's like just different online tools, whether that be online banks or online ETF and stock brokerage firms or things like that. Like it's probably not through a Canadian or American bank anymore. I mean, I guess IB is probably
Yeah.
American, but it's just sort of like these like international services now. And then so if you have to now start building up your like retirement savings, how does that look to you?
Yeah, so I think, retirement looks different for everybody on how you want to save and what that looks like. And I do have savings accounts, which I think is important, especially for emergencies, and you never know when things are going to come up. But then investing as well and making your money make some kind of a return for you as well. So that's kind of what it looks like for me in terms of retirement. I like to keep things pretty simple, honestly. I don't like to overcomplicate. And I know sometimes it can get complicated because I have bank accounts in so many different countries. Not that I have a lot of money in some of them, but yeah, I like to kind of keep things as simple as possible. So if I can use one or two different brokerage agencies and trust them, know that my funds are in there and just kind of go in and check on them every month or every 2 months, then that's enough for me and make sure it's accumulating and knowing I have some savings. And then obviously just continuing to make money every month.
There you go. I like it. Yeah, so I guess let's start wrapping things up. Again, the podcast is Work, Wealth, and Travel. Do you have any final message for the audience?
Ooh, we've touched on so many things today. Um, I think, like, I don't know exactly who your audience is who typically listens, but I think if you haven't taken the step, just think of what I was speaking about with lifestyle design and how you want your ideal life to look like and what that looks like for you. Because, like I said, it does look different for everyone. What I do and living out of a suitcase and getting my residency in Paraguay is definitely not for everybody, but there is an in between that can work for anybody in whatever situation you're in, whatever you desire out of your life. And you can really set up your life however you want, but you kind of just have to take that first action and figure out what you actually want out of your life. So I would encourage people to really just think critically about that if you haven't already. And if you have, then amazing. I hope whatever you're doing, you probably are loving because you have intentionally designed your life that way.
Yeah, that's awesome. Um, Yeah, I'm so happy that we did this episode because I think you definitely brought a new experience that we've seen different flavors of in the past, but you kind of brought it together in a package that we don't see too often, like a Canadian female digital nomad, Latin America, Paraguay, um, bank accounts around the world, entrepreneur, and speaking very well on personal finance and all this stuff, podcast host, so you had a good microphone and just generally like a good presenter in general. So really, really impressed, and I really enjoyed this episode.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Do you want to once again just tell everyone about your socials and where you want to direct people to get in touch with you and learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Nomad Neeks on all platforms, which is Nomad Neeks, kind of my nickname. And yeah, you can find me on any platform there, but I'm usually on Instagram. I share a lot of my life, sometimes maybe a bit too much. We had an incident yesterday where I shared a little bit about that on my Instagram stories. So if you ever want to see, and I try to kind of post a lot about the actual day to day life of a digital nomad because it can get very glamorized and look a lot different on social media and the beach and the hammock and the laptop, and that's not the reality for probably almost all of us. So really trying to post what a digital nomad life actually looks like, and sometimes it's craziness and sometimes it's working all day. So feel free to follow me there, and then my podcast is one of my bigger platforms as well, which is work, wealth, and travel. So you can find me there, and my DMs are always open. If you have any questions or want to chat about anything, I would love to do that as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for doing this, and good luck in Argentina. That's where you're headed next.
Yes.
Sweet. Well, bring as much U.S. currency as you can and get that blue rate. I'm
Yeah,
sure you
that's
know that
good.
tip by now.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, this has been another episode of the My Latin Life podcast. Again, our guest today was Nicole, aka Nomad Neeks. Nicole, thanks so much for the episode, and thanks for listening, everyone.
Thank you.